Hello, everyone, and welcome to Business Immigration Gateway Series. Thank you so much for being with us today. I'm Mary Yazdani, founder and CEO of GenesisLink. Thank you so much for joining us from different cities across the Canada and also internationally and taking this time today. Before we start, I wanted to add a personal note here. As you may have heard from the news, there's a war happening in Iran right now, and you may see the situation and follow the situation in Middle East. I and Zeynab both are Iranian, and we wanted to mention that we are seeing you. Any families that is impacted or it's worried about the situation, we are with you. We are one of you as well, and we send our wish, good wishes for the family's health and good of everyone and our warmth to you. So let's begin. Today we are going to talk about something that everyone in this room knows. And that one is the reality that happened in December 31st. The startup visa has been closed by IRCC. So we are not spending this hour to look backward and just see what happened for the startup visa or why it was closed. But as most of the attendees in these webinars are the professional who has been impacted by this news, I know all of us, we want to move forward and also understand what are the available pathway, what are the best advice that we can provide for our clients, and help them to navigate these immigration pathways. So that's why we are here today. And the other reality is that about the startup visa, as you send us some of your questions, and we know you have still some questions for your existing clients, we will spend some time at the end of this webinar talking about the startup visa backlog. But the rest, we will talk about what are the available options, what are the other business immigration pathways that exist today, and they are active. Today, I have a dear friend and also professional with me. Zeynab Moayyed is our guest today. So welcome, Zeynab. And for those of you who doesn't know Zeynab has depth and strategic thinking in legal immigration and also have enormous respect. I have some enormous respect for her. And also Zeynab is a certified specialist in citizenship and immigration law, one of the very few lawyers in Ontario to hold that designation. She is a barrister and solicitor in Ontario and attorney in New York, with more than a decade of experience in complex business immigration, federal court advocacy, and also corporate mobility. What I find particularly valuable about having Zeynab here today is that she does not just practice immigration law. She is actively shaping where the field is going. She is the co-founder of AIMICI, the Artificial Intelligence Monitor for Immigration in Canada and internationally. She is co-chair of the AI committee at the Canadian Bar Association, and she is the agenda chair of the CBA National Immigration Conference. I'm going to draw on that expertise specifically when we get to the backlog section. Zeynab, thank you so much for being with us and welcome.
Thank you, Mary. It's a pleasure to join you and everybody else here today.
Thank you so much. So I already mentioned about the agenda of today and how do we want to just, what are the subjects that we will cover here. But there is one thing that I think nowadays at GenesisLink, at least talking to different immigration professional and clients, what we have seen based on our experience is the problem on the assessment. So what's happening is that as soon as a client reach out for immigration solution, they are asking for permanent residence. And the conflict that we see is that the first advice to them is, okay, I'm aware of C11 or I have some experience in C11 or, for example, one of the PNPs like Alberta PNP program, and they right away, they check if they fit to that profile or not, if they are good candidate for that program. But for us, what is important, I think, is just having the right assessment is not about, I think what it needs to go first is the client, not that business immigration pathway that we know about it, and having the right assessment. And for having that right assessment, we are using a model that has 4 dimensions. The first dimension is TR versus PR. So like the first question everyone is asking definitely is asking about permanent residency. They are asking that about they just like what is the best way to get our PR. I think what is important or what we are doing is asking them, okay, so what is your situation? Do you need to be in Canada as soon as possible? And is it something that is needed for your operation? The next one is capital. I think is as PNPs have some threshold from 100K to 250K and more for investment, is asking them about the capital, and asking this early question helps to not wasting daytime and also not directing them to a pathway that is not good for them. The next one is language. I think it's really important that not only the IELTS score and the test score that they have, but the operational capacity is really important. And the next one is risk tolerance. What happens if the program get delays another 18 months or 2 years, or what if there is some pivot in the program? So I wanted, Zeynab, to ask your opinion here about the ethical and legal part of this 4 dimension, because I think the boundaries around what we can and cannot responsibly promise in 2026 have become even more important with all the just changes that is happening in immigration. What are you seeing from the legal and regulatory side of
Okay.
the assessments from the professionals?
Absolutely. So you're right. There has been really a seismic shift over the last few years, and what we see today is sort of the result of both the changing policy, but also the political situation in terms of where we are. And it's unlikely to change in the opposite direction anytime soon. So it's really important to talk about this particular topic in terms of where we're situated in business immigration and where we're likely going in the next few years. And that helps us in terms of consulting our clients and providing them with realistic expectations, right? From the very beginning that applicants are contacting us, it's a situation of obtaining as much information from them as possible, but also providing them with that sort of realistic lay of the land and projection of what the future is going to look like. So even though almost everybody who contacts us has some either immediate goal for permanent residency or that's part of their overall plan. It's really important to have those conversations and not just remember having those conversations is important, but documenting those conversations is equally important because people don't remember 2, 3, 4, 5 years down the line what they spoke about in those initial consultations. So setting that very clearly for them that the policies of Canada as they currently stand and as they're likely going to be for the next little while is that we don't have permanent residency pathways that are quick and easy. That's the bottom line. Then building from that, we do have a few remaining pathways, but they're extremely hard to apply for and obtain. So again, setting realistic expectations there. So when we talk about, for example, the PNP options, yes, they exist on paper, but what's the journey of getting to that PR at the end? So setting expectations and educating clients in terms of how decision making is taking place. Generally speaking, entrepreneur and business clients are sophisticated parties. I think everyone here who's interacted with them has a sense of that. And, that sophistication doesn't necessarily mean they're great at English, but it does mean that they understand the realities and they can do their own research. So many of them will have already seen what's been happening, for example, on the startup visa side, right? And so I think we can use examples from, the last couple of years when we're trying to explain why it is that we can't give them certainty, right? We can say these are the things that have happened. Programs that appear to be completely solid for a long time have changed. And in terms of documenting these conversations, you can have your post-consultation notes. Those are the best sort of document and evidence of that. But also, once you do enter into an agreement with applicants, right? Setting those things out very clearly in your retainer agreement is going to be critical. It's always been important, but now particularly where you could wake up, there could be massive changes in the law, there could be whole programs wiped out. Somebody might invest a significant amount of time and money and effort and build up something based on a projected pathway. And, we had this happen last year where they removed job offer points. And so a lot of people who were sort of building up and trying to get to permanent residency couldn't do that. And having, provisions in your retainer that specifically state if there's change in law, if there are cancellations, these are things that could happen. It's impossible to predict. And at that point, we'll reassess, but there's no guarantees, right? So building that in, I think those are really important considerations nowadays when we're speaking to our entrepreneur and business applicants.
Yeah, exactly. Thank you so much for your explanation. And I think it's really important to give the right advice with honesty, as you have mentioned, not just to closing those clients' agreement, because this is a long path and long journey for the immigration professionals and clients. It takes a couple of years. And I think these changes in the immigration rules by itself is bringing lots of frustration for the clients. So we don't want necessarily to add the extra frustration when they get aware and knowledgeable that that was not maybe the right program for them, or this was not the pathway that it was designed for them. This was the easier one, or it was the one that the immigration professional was more comfortable with. We definitely want to avoid that one for not having further rejections or a complaint from the clients, and that's why that the assessment has become really important. Zeynab, if you let me, I wanted now to ask also our audience about their opinion. So we will run a quick poll. And for everyone that is here with us, if you can write your options, a selected option in the chat, you will see the result. We will review it together and then we will move to the next topic. So it takes a few seconds to run the poll.
Maybe while we're just waiting for that poll to come up, one thing I want to add here is that looking at the experience of what happened with the startup visa can be really helpful for applicant and for representatives now when they think about the kinds of conversations they want to have up front and also what they want to have in their retainer agreements on a going forward basis. This is a program that was running relatively well. It was kind of predictable that things would go off the rails in terms of there was no cap on the program. And over the last few years, we've seen increasingly refusal rates. In order to have protected yourself, you would have had to have very specific things in your retainer, including no guarantees with respect to time, that the processing requirements could change, that this is what the processing requirements are as of the time that you're applying. And remember, one of the challenges that we face in immigration, unfortunately, is that IRCC can make decisions, can change things, but oftentimes our clients can't really do anything about it. They can't reach, they can't even reach an officer.
Yeah.
And the maybe they could, in some circumstances, try to apply for judicial review, things like that. But what ends up happening is that we are the ones that they have an agreement with. And so they try to reach out to us, and it becomes an extremely stressful situation, particularly if you have maybe several clients or a lot of clients in these categories that have invested a lot of time and money, but also get, a very bad experience as a result of these changes. All the more reason to think up front about how to advise them, but also how to document that and protect yourself.
Yeah, that's a great point. Exactly. Thank you so much. And that's really great to protect themselves also for the further changes, unexpected changes that is impacting everyone. So sorry for the delay. We had some technical issue with running the poll, but here is our first one. In 2026, what percentage of your entrepreneur clients inquiries are now asking about pathway other than a startup visa. Less than 25%, 25 to 50%, 50 to 75%, or more than 75%. Or the last option is I don't currently have entrepreneur clients. You can just vote and we will review it. We will give you a few seconds to vote before seeing the result. So while we are waiting for others to vote, Zainab, I wanted to share something interesting with you and also with our audience that we were reviewing last year based on the changes that was happening in the startup visa. And you know that because of the conditions and eligibility criteria of a startup visa and every other things that we know about a startup visa, there are so many people who are interested in the startup visa. And we were looking, they were asking when we were saying that this is going to happen, they were asking, how about other countries? And looking in the other countries, still, I think Canada is really nowadays, it's hard to get permanent residency, not only for the business immigration, but also for the economic pathways. It seems that the timelines are getting long. There is a huge backlog and all of those issues. But when reviewing other countries, I think still Canada, with all those difficulties that is in place, still Canada is interesting and it's somehow better than others for receiving the permanent residency. I'm not talking about the temporary residency because there are other countries that usually is cheaper, is faster, and it's easier to get temporary residence, but then you will invest time, money, and few years without receiving a status on that country. So I think still that one is interesting. And to me, it was interesting seeing what's happening in the other countries in the field of a startup visa or business immigration. Okay, so let's look at the results. Less than 25% are looking for other pathways, and then 25 to 50% are asking. Then it's So I think more than 75% of the entrepreneur clients are asking about other pathways. This is, I think we were expecting to see this because they only knew something that it doesn't exist anymore. So of course, now the question is that since that one is closed, what are the other ways that we can come to Canada? And this assessment here and the votes here, it gets us to the next section of our discussion today, Zeynab, which are about we talk about the assessment of the different pathway that exists. C11, we have like owner-operator work permit and other pathways that are temporary comparing to the PNP pathways, that we have different programs for permanent residency in different provinces with different situation and conditions and eligibility criteria. So can you please walk us through the active ones? And maybe it's better if we start with the temporary ones and then go to the permanent pathways.
Absolutely. So we do have several temporary resident pathways for entrepreneurs to come to Canada to run their business, and they have all of them become much more difficult in the last 2 years, particularly. So the first one I can point to is C11, which is the Entrepreneur Significant Benefit Pathway. We just had recent changes to this just in the last few weeks, where IRCC has come out and more clearly defined what they mean by significant benefit. But in my experience, and I think probably a lot of people in this room that are watching are going to have a similar experience, IRCC has already been refusing a lot of applications in this category for saying that they don't meet significant benefit, and it has been extremely difficult to get approvals. And my experience is what ends up happening at IRCC a lot is that they end up doing a lot of refusals on a ground where they're going to tighten it up. So we saw that with intercompany transferees back in 2023 and 2024, and then they made changes. We've seen that also on the startup side as well. But on this particularly, we have seen increasingly that officers will really scrutinize whether an applicant is going to, and their business is going to create significant economic benefit. And it's not sufficient just to say that it is, that has to be backed up with a lot of evidence as well. The other pathway that there is the intercompany transferee. And in 2024, they really broke that down into whether you're going to be creating and setting up a new business here in Canada, or like a new branch, versus if you're being transferred to come to Canada as a senior executive of an existing business. And that also has become more challenging and more difficult for applicants because if you are in fact coming to Canada to set up a business, you have to meet the new definition of multinational corporation, right? Which is you already have operations that are generating income in two other places before you come to Canada. So you have to be a multinational before you become a multinational by expanding to Canada. Um, so we see again there, and it's interesting because also in those ICT applications, they do consider significant benefit too. So significant benefit is sort of the gray area where IRCC has a lot of discretion and it can essentially choose how many files it wants to refuse by going back and relying on this. And we deal with a lot of the refusals that come up in this category. And I want to say this to everybody here. You might get a refusal and it's very long and it seems like, oh my God, the officer really went into a lot of detail and they considered it. But at the end of the day, we actually see a lot of them and they are extremely similar. They might pull some information from an application, but what they're really doing is recycling their templates. So don't give up if you receive a refusal. Contact someone like myself to be able to do an assessment and see whether we can actually judicially review that and get that decision reversed. But they do have a lot of discretion, and we see that it is even more important than ever to really document those applications and make sure that they're very complete. The other sort of temporary category is the C60, which we can talk about in the context of the PNP applications. But really on the temporary side, those are probably the two main categories that we're using for different kind of entrepreneurs that are trying to come.
Oh, perfect. Thank you so much for explaining this. And for the owner operator work permit also, that was high demand. I think it was in 2019, if I'm right, that
Yeah.
the government made some changes. They said that it's not LMIA exempt anymore, and just, somehow they closed it without closing the program.
Yeah.
So, do you see that like Stream is still a active and reliable stream for the applicants to apply for, or no?
Unfortunately, not really, because I think it actually was around just after the pandemic where they
Yeah,
did
I
change
remember.
they
Yeah.
changed the requirements and made it much more difficult. I mean, they were already making it difficult for applicants to get high-level senior executive positions where the business might have been smaller. But in any case, it's been much more difficult because in the LMIA context, they have to advertise and show that they are hiring for the position. So effectively, we've not really been able to use that as much anymore. In some very unique circumstances, potentially, but overall, no, it's not really an effective one. In some cases where somebody is not necessarily an entrepreneur in terms of like major shareholder, but they're going to come in and have some shareholdings, it might be possible to apply for an LMIA in
Yeah.
terms of, their senior executive, that kind of thing. But generally speaking, the owner operator is not effective anymore.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much for explaining about this. So before going to the permanent residency pathways, let's run another poll. Hopefully this time we won't have any technical issue and delays. Let's see the poll here. Which temporary business pathway do you feel least confident advising on? C11, ICT, or owner operator LMIA? I'm comfortable with all three. Okay, we will wait for you a few seconds to vote. Uh, but based on your experience, Zainab, which one do you think is like, people are less confident, or there are more complexities in it that, like, people, let's guess before seeing the votes. So what do you think? Which one needs
Um,
more education?
I would probably say the owner-operator is the one that is not to be used really as much. And part of that is because there's just no guidance really from IRCC on it. One of the good things I will say generally is that IRCC has actually come out and published more of what their expectations are, both on the ICT and now on the significant benefit, which while it makes it more difficult, I think it makes it more fair because at least applicants know the kind of high threshold they
Right.
have to meet, which is really important because before they didn't know. And they were submitting applications, they were being encouraged maybe to submit applications with minimum documentation, and the officer's expectations were up here, and they didn't know about it. But now we know where the expectation is. So either you're going to submit an application and try to meet that, or you're not going to submit an application. I think you're not gonna hear me say this very often, but IRCC has taken a good step in increasing the information they have on those programs.
Okay, perfect. Thank you so much. So let's review the results. And I just wanted to acknowledge that we are seeing your question, and I see that there are so many questions on the chat. We will categorize them at the end. We will cover some of them in our discussion when I see something, and then we will, if there is any remaining question that we didn't have time to respond, we will send you the answer right after the webinar. So it seems 18% voted for C11, 23% for ICT, 41% owner operator LMIA. You're absolutely right on that. And then 18%, I'm comfortable with all three. So thank you so much, everyone, for participating in the poll. It's good to hear your just your feedback, and this helps us is not only to engaging our audience. We want usually how we design the program is not pre-designed, having everything for 1 year based on what is happening, all the updates of IRCC or the requests that we are receiving from our clients. We design what the topics next topic can be or what our audience like to hear. So participating, I think, in the polls is really important for shaping the next session from our side. So next, move to the permanent residency pathways for the entrepreneurs. Can you please explain that one? What are the active programs?
Sure. Really, at this point, the only active programs are the provincial programs. Remember, Quebec also has an entrepreneur program. I really won't touch on that because it requires French and has its own challenges. But the other provinces, most of them have some variation of an entrepreneur program, whether it's, a rural program or a farm program or something for the graduates of that province who are entrepreneurs. And all of them are a two-step program where you will be applying for essentially a work permit at the first stage if you are approved. And then after you run the business, you'll be able to apply for permanent residency. There are some very interesting challenges. I'll just point to them very briefly within the context of our conversation as people are starting to think more about these programs. Um, the intention of these programs is for people to remain in those communities. So a lot of the factors that you're going to see in their initial sort of, questions and scoring is going to be related to that, right? If you have connections to that province, what kind of business targeted to their province that you're going to be running, if you have family connections there, and therefore, if you don't have family there and you have family in other parts of Canada, that can kind of work against you. Remember that as the quotas generally and the numbers have gone down for the immigration programs in Canada, all the PNPs have seen their numbers cut. By the end of 2025, the numbers were raised a little bit, but they're still not at the level that they were before the reductions. And so you can imagine that probably the entrepreneur programs are not the priorities of the provinces. They're trying to fill particular gaps. So overall, the number of spots that are available at each province is not going to be significant. There are going to be maybe a couple of hundred spots, right, in each province. And so while we talk about this and more people are talking about, oh, PNPs are the pathway, again, I'm reminding everyone, let's think about what happened to the SUV when you're talking to your clients and trying to advise them and giving them realistic chance of their success. Really need to take that into consideration of what those quotas are going to mean in terms of the ability of clients to, what score they're going to need to be able to get even an invitation from that province, and then, whether they're going to be competitive or not. In addition to that, the other portion of this is that even if you do or everything, you get an invitation, you apply to the province. Unfortunately, what we're seeing on the federal side is that the C60 work permits that applicants will submit based on their support letters that are coming from the provinces, we're seeing more and more of those being refused. And it's for applicants from across the board. Doesn't matter what country they're from, doesn't matter what province that they're applying to. Officers are going back, and I'm not sure how this is really justified within IRCC, because the expertise that the local officers have, let's say whatever province they're sitting in, they know their market better. They know their immigration requirements. They've usually interviewed people, so they have a lot more information. They make a determination that this person is good to come here and do this business. But then we see the kind of C60 refusals where it will be based on, I don't think this business is good for this province. I don't think it's going to work. There's not enough significant benefit. Um, and so we're unfortunately seeing a lot of refusals there. So if you are lucky enough to go through with your client and you get to a point where you actually get a support letter, that work permit, do not rely on the minimums of what IRCC said should be included in work permits. You have to go really above and beyond. Um, the other point, I think you mentioned this, Mary, right at the beginning, which was the language requirements. It is sometimes possible to have sort of like minimum language and be able to apply under these programs, but we've seen this increasingly where whether within C60, and also we saw this with startup visa work permits, where applicants meet the PR program requirements, right? So they'll have like maybe 4.5, 5.5 IELTS. And the officer will refuse and say, I don't think this person can actually do the job because their language is not sufficient for, a business owner or a significant enough for a senior manager. And we can argue against it, but I think we need to have those conversations with clients to try and push them to have higher scores, and that if they don't, that becomes a real risk in their applications. And finally, the other thing is these are very long-term applications. So you go through, you're trying to get in, you get an invitation, hopefully you get a work permit, you come, you do the work, then you apply for your nomination. And once you have the nomination, you still have to stay in the province for at least a year or two more years. So it is a very long and involved process, because the applicant also has to remain in Canada. It's an active in process, active management in person requirement to it. So I think those are really important factors to keep in mind. And I'm getting a lot more people sort of asking, is it possible to switch from an SUV that's unfortunately now stuck to a PNP application? And there's a lot of questions that you need to ask before you can make that determination. Oftentimes, the startup visa applicants, if they had co-founders, are not going to meet the ownership requirements that they have in PNPs. Two, you're going to have that nexus to the province. Are they sufficiently connected? Can they make a case that there's going to be benefits for that province? Would they be able to convince a province that they're going to go there and stay? And so you're going to really like, and there's other things, but I think those are the two big ones that we need to think about when people are trying to switch from one to the other. And because we have a backlog of anyone's guess, but over 40,000 SUV applicants that are sort of trying to think about other opportunities, you can imagine if just a portion of those try to switch over to the PNPs, that the minimum scores, that whatever we've seen over the last year or two is going to go up in them. One other thing I will say, Mary, very quickly is, at least in Ontario, where we don't currently have a program, there is talk that they do want to release a new PNP program. I really hope they learn from their prior experiences and create a workable one, because there really is a need for it in Ontario. And two, we do know that the federal government is talking about a new entrepreneur pilot program. I wouldn't be able to tell you today what the requirements of that are, what that's going to
Or what
look
the time
like.
of launching is it? Yeah.
How many people are there going to be? What are the requirements? And, would they give maybe some priority to people who are already in the SUV? I don't know. But there is going to be changes and there's going to be potentially some new opportunities that come up. But as of this time, I think probably the only one that applicants can sort of think about is the PNP.
Yeah, I think that's the only active one. And thank you so much for bringing. I know that we have several PMP streams, and it's really hard to explain or go into the details for just all of them, or the active one, or which one is better, which one is shorter, which one is the right fit for whom, which profiles. I know that it's hard to cover everything here, but I wanted to mention to our audience that we that we had a startup visa webinar series last year, and because of the closure of the program, we decided to switch to other business immigration streams. So please, just if you are following our channels and also you are part of our subscribers, you will receive some more data about the details of each of this program, some educational content that we will release weekly. And also, I just wanted to thank Zeynab for accepting to be our guest for next month, which is in April 8th. She will be our guest, and we will have more, we will hear more about all the PMPs in more details rather than just naming them or just mentioning the high uh, eligibility criteria like language or the staying there, having connection with the province that Zeynab already has mentioned. And there are some other details that I'm pretty sure you have some questions, and definitely Zeynab can answer those questions. So I wanted to announce this in advance because in case that you are coming for receiving better advice and receiving more information about the latest updates on the PMP programs, and you have any question, please feel free to send it to us before the next webinar, which is on April 8th. Or you can send it right away here, or after finishing this meeting that you will receive the recording, you can send us back your question and we will make sure that we are covering it in our next topic. So now that we have finished this, let's do another poll and ask our audience what they think about this PMP. This is also helping for the next session, I think, the answers. What is your biggest barrier to recommending PMP entrepreneur streams to clients? Unfamiliar with provincial differences and requirements, client capital is below investment threshold, complexity of performance monitoring obligations, no reliable business consulting partners to support the file. And the last one is I'm already recommending PMPs actively. So we will wait a few seconds for you to vote. And Zainab, while we are waiting for the attendees to vote, I wanted to review the question that we are receiving on the chat. I'm looking at the question that I have received here. So where are the questions? So someone is asking about, is there any upcoming business investment program coming up? I think Zainab already mentioned this, that yes, everyone heard after closure of the December 31st closure of the startup visa, government said a new programs they will announce, but when, how, and all those details, no one knows so far. So as soon as we have some details, we will share with you and we will give more information. But at this time, we don't know. And as also Zainab has mentioned, I think it was 2 years ago in April 2024 when they announced cap for the startup visa. A month after, I was invited for a roundtable for Minister of Small Businesses in Ontario. And I remember I brought up the challenges that with these changes of the IRCC is happening with the businesses. And I remember she mentioned that I know that for the past year, Ontario government is working in announcing a new startup or investment program or business immigration program, and they will announce it soon. That was May 2024, and now we are March 2026. We still are hearing the same thing that there will be some updates, but I just wanted to mention it seems they are working on it for some time. So hopefully this year we will receive some update about these new programs. And next question is how can we prove the economic benefit? That one is for the other one. That's a long answer. So I would skip this one. It's perfect question. And I think Zeynab is the best person to respond to this, but if we have time, I will cover it at the end. So let's look at the result before reading the rest of the questions. Okay, perfect. So it seems 35% said they are unfamiliar with provincial differences and requirement. That's perfect to know because we can put our focus on introducing them on the next sessions in our newsletter as well. 9% they have mentioned client capital is below investment threshold. 13% mentioned complexity of performance monitoring obligation. And 30% have mentioned no reliable business consulting partner to support the file. And 13% I'm already recommending PNP actively. So I think most of the votes are going through the unfamiliar with PNP streams, and I'm happy to hear this result. And this is what we were expecting. That's why that we asked Zeynab to cover more about different PNP streams in our upcoming webinar. Thank you so much for participating. Before going to Q&A section, we don't have that much time, but I know that many of the people who are in this room today, they have questions regarding the startup visa backlogs. And we know you have mentioned that there are thousands of backlogs and there is not so much update that we are hearing these days from IRCC for the previous one, people who are waiting 2-3 years. So from our experience, I would mention one sentence and then I would let you speak more. And you have mentioned yesterday to me that there are some cases, court cases that maybe you want to share with our attendees. The part is that I think the worst thing to do is do nothing and just only applying, especially if you are on idea stage and then you wait for 10 years, 2 years, 5 years, and IRCC asking for evidence, for asking for just some progress that you have made within this time that you were waiting and you don't have anything. That's the worst thing. So having proper documentation, progress report, an active somehow progress regarding what the business plan that you have submitted and the commitment that you made, I think is really important for decreasing the risk of this approval at the later stage. But I will leave it to Zeynab. I know that there were some updates on the startup visa. Also, we received a question regarding MTA suspension. I appreciate if you can explain more on that.
Sure, absolutely. So this is definitely one of those situations where the advice of deal with the problem before it gets too big is really applies to what IRCC should have done much earlier, at least maybe in even 2024, before allowing us to sort of get to this point. But in any case, what we are seeing now, and I did send a couple of slides. I think you can share them at this point. I think that might just be helpful as we're going through this.
Sure.
I agree with you, Mary, that applicants who are already in that backlog have to really make a determination of how they want to proceed. If they want to try to preserve an opportunity to have a successful startup visa application determination, ultimately, they're going to have to be active. And unfortunately, IRCC has not provided any guidance in terms of how long those applications are going to take and how they're going to assess things. But going based on what they've been doing over the last 2 years, particularly, they want to see complete active progress on all applications. And it's interesting because I'm also part, and you mentioned the thing, but with the Canadian Bar Associations, we're trying to do lobbying and advocacy that the changes that have been made, particularly some of the big changes from December, are not fair, procedurally unfair, right? Because not only was the program suspended, They also suspended the issuance of new work permits for applicants, right? Only people who already have work permits can apply for extensions. And this has huge ramifications for prioritization and who's actually going to be assessed. And this was not the case when they submitted the application. So I'm going to talk about that in a moment. But before I get to that, the other big changes that we've seen was the suspension of the designated entity, MTA, which is very interesting why they decided to do that because the way that they were proceeding anyway, because MTA is not a priority organization, it was almost impossible that they were going to get to the applicants from MTA. Um, but now that they actually made this determination, it says that the processing of applications is going to be on hold for 9 months up till September. And we actually had a case in court last week where the mandamus application had been started months ago, but the hearing happened in January or February. And the court accepted the suspension and said that based on the suspension, in that case, the application had been in processing since 2021. They said that IRCC is not obligated to continue with the processing of this application because this suspension is in process. And while that is not necessarily the final word on this, I think unfortunately that doesn't bode well. It doesn't give me a lot of confidence that other applicants will be able to sort of do anything about it. But again, in the grand scheme of things, MTA is not one of the designated entities that has the priority anyway. So it's kind of, there's a massive fire and then IRCC is just putting more gas on that fire. I don't know why they're doing that. Um, I'm going to talk about prioritization in a moment, but the refusal rates have also shot up, which is really problematic. Um, you know, the maximum quota that has gone from 5,000 to 500 this year, it creates this really long processing times. But what we've been seeing is that, refusal rates of over 70%, acceptance rates of 20 something percent, which is a complete reversal from prior years where we saw acceptance rates between 70 to 80%, or even higher than 80% in some years. And so what we're noticing in all of those refusals, again, going back to Mary's point and what I said, a lot of those refusals are based on Regulation 89, which talks about whether, there's an artificial transaction and the primary purpose of the application was visa and immigration as opposed to the business itself. And the way that officers are approaching that is by looking at evidence that the applicants provide in terms of what their progress is, and they go into absolutely incredibly small details of an application. And the court decisions so far have not pushed back and really held IRCC to account on this. We're continuing to try to do that, but it is not an easy task to be able to show, particularly if someone is refused and they really didn't do work or they didn't do sufficient work, or that when they received procedural fairness letters, they didn't provide enough evidence and documentation. So this sort of focus on progress is what's fueling a lot of those refusals. And it's funny because it's possible that IRCC could go through a lot of its backlog more quickly, but by just refusing more applications, not necessarily by actually
Yeah.
accepting more people, right? So that's something to be mindful of. If we go to the next slide, the other point I want to discuss in more detail, and it goes back to the changes from December, is now that new applicants can't apply for work permits, this significantly changes who can access priority processing. And before the December changes, priority processing was based on points 2, 3, and 4 of what's on this page.
Mhm.
But the ministerial instructions changed this in December, and this was confirmed in the other mandamus decision that came out last week, where the court received evidence from IRCC in terms of, what its prioritization is. And um, not only do we have, if you are in one of these priority streams or you have letters of support from one of these priority organizations, you will receive priority in terms of processing, but they've added this portion, which is if you have a valid work permit
Oh,
and you have a commitment certificate from a VC and you have a commitment certificate from an AC or, one of the CTN incubators. So I think this is hugely problematic because you've changed the game halfway through and you've essentially like cut off anybody who doesn't have work permits from being able to access priority. And given, how long processing times are, it's going to be obviously much more difficult for someone after 7 years or 8 years to try and prove that they've been progressively working on their business compared to someone who has, who receives priority and is able to have their application assessed after 2, 3 years. But this has become very clear that it's, anyone who's here with a work permit under the SUV and has these, that's going to be priority. And then the other thing that the court case, if we go to the next slide,
Sure.
essentially it's going to work is that this is kind of taking it from the decision, but everybody who meets all of those requirements, so work permit and having a letter of support from, let's say, VCAC or one of the CTN designated entities, they would have first priority, and then they're going to go to the next group, which is everyone who has those priority commitment certificates but doesn't have a work permit, and then they're going to go to everybody else. And it is going to be very difficult for us to predict with any certainty how long the applications are going to take. So when you go to IRCC's website right now and you're trying to figure out how long processing is going to take, I don't think that is in any way accurate at all. So if you put in a processing date of January 2021, which is where that particular application I mentioned to you guys was from, it will say, there's like, I don't know, 1,500 applicants in front of you. But that is not accurate because there are some of those ahead of that person who are going to be priority, and
Yeah.
a lot of people after that person who are going to be priority. So we actually don't have any real sense of how long applications are going to take. And this becomes really important to discuss with clients. And I'm actually in my own practice going through step by step of like our client groups and try to communicate with them, sending them information. And I think the reality is, and I think this is what IRCC is relying on, some people will determine that they can't pursue this anymore
Mm.
because of the uncertainty. And it would be better if IRCC made it more clear as opposed to pushing people to self-select out of the program. But I think
Yeah.
that's the reality that we're going to face where people are going to see this, they're going to determine if they want to continue or not. Um, because if you do want to stay, you do have to continue to commit capital and completely do the work of the business. And it's very difficult for somebody who doesn't have that work permit to continue to do that. But that is unfortunately the reality. I mean, at least we have a bit more clarity on what IRCC wants to do, and the court has unfortunately, at least in these two cases, sort of taken IRCC's submissions and accepted them. There hasn't been any pushback. We are going to continue to try to push back against this in other cases that we take forward, but this is going to be very difficult because the way that they've structured it and added in the work permit requirement is going to make it uh, much more difficult to fight against for applicants who do face those long delays.
Yeah, thank you so much, Zeynab, for sharing these updates with our attendees. And I think for any RCIC or lawyer in this room who has backlog clients, particularly those that they are in idea stage and who have not made any meaningful business progress, this is a conversation that worth having with us or with someone that they know the space. We can help structure the business progress documentation, help you with obtaining clients, or if they are not in Canada and they need some help to show that progress, which needs someone in Canada to establish those ones, definitely you can get in touch with us and we try to help you. And I think this is not about adding more complexity, it's about protecting your client's file and your own reputation. So if that's relevant to you, definitely you can just, reach out to us, contact us, and we will be happy to help. I like to have a last poll here regarding the backlog for the startup visa. Okay, so do you currently have active SUV clients in the IRCC backlog? Yes, 1 to 3 active clients. Yes, 4 or more. No active SUV backlog files, unsure of the current status. So we will wait a few seconds. And while we are waiting, we don't have that much time left, but I wanted to ask you regarding your expertise in and dedication for AI in immigration practices. So do you think that at the end, IRCC or is on the path of choosing AI and instead of hiring more people to resolve that backlog issue for all different type of the just streams that exist, or no? Do they have any intention to go that path?
Well, absolutely. They have been reducing their staff over the last couple of years, and so at the same time, they're investing heavily in different kinds of AI solutions. Just this week, we have seen them. Sorry, last week, but in the last couple of days, the use of generative AI on economic class applications, so express entry refusals. I think, unfortunately, it is the reality that we're dealing with. I don't think they're going to shy away from it. I think they're going to continue to use it. Now, there's two aspects to this. One, because their tools are not good enough yet, it is possible for us to JR them. And I've been very successful, thankfully, over the last couple of years and really pushing back on that. So if you do have a situation where either the refusals specifically refer to these tools, please reach out to me. Or you see a situation where you're like, this doesn't make sense. Send it. I'm more than happy to take a look at it. You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm very available and accessible. The other part of your question is, could they use this to address the backlog? I think they are going to use it in some categories. I'm not sure if they're going to use it in this category per se. I mean, they could, what I've been seeing on the express entry application refusals, is sort of the groundwork and that they could build on it for this. But I also, unfortunately, we didn't have time to talk about this today, but we also have Bill C-12, and there's also the ability they have to either indefinitely just hold these applications for many, many years until most people drop out, or they could wipe out the class of applications. Those are things that are likely to happen. I don't know, whether it's 20%, 30%, but those are realistic risks that we have to talk about. But AI is certainly a huge important part of all of the temporary resident refusals that we see. So when we're talking about C11s, the ICTs, the C60s, there's the footprint of the digital technology really coming through on those. So if you do have refusals on those, again, reach out. Those are definitely cases that we can assist with.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That was really insightful. And I really love to go to the just questions, back to the question that we have received in the chat and also the submitted one. I try to cover them as much as I could and monitor them while we were talking to make sure that I'm covering in my question from you. But there are so many good and great questions that we have received, and unfortunately, we didn't have time to just answer them. Again, our apologies, we have a just limited time here, but we will send you the responses to this one. I see a couple of questions that we will respond definitely in our next webinar. They are relevant for the next topic. Yeah, that's all. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you so much, Zeynab, for sharing your insight, your expertise with us, and for help us in this mission of just educating our clients, educating our entrepreneurs to make sure that they are selecting a right path just for the immigration journey. And thank you so much, everyone. You will receive a survey and recording of this webinar right after finishing. Please take your time and just submit the survey responses to us. That will help us to improve our webinars, next webinars. and also for the next topics that we want to cover. Thanks again, Zeynab, for being with us today and accepting to be our guest for our next webinar. Thank you so much, everyone. Have a wonderful day.
Bye, everyone.
Thank you.